Today I'm going to teach you how to use your camera and use it to its fullest potential. We're going to try to cover about 80% of the core essentials of videography, and it really doesn't even matter what camera you have. These tips are going to take you from this sad looking shot of me using automatic settings and poor overhead lighting to this shot that you see right here that looks so much better. And we're going to try to do it all in under 10 minutes.
You got to just press record.
So the first thing we'll talk about are frame rates, and this is one of the most important settings when capturing video. Frame rate refers to the amount of video frames that your camera is capturing every second, and then it's going to stitch those series of frames together to create video motion. When it comes to choosing which frame rate is best for your video, we usually recommend 24 or 30 frames per second for regular videos like YouTube videos, short films, and social media. And then 60 or 120 frames per second are typically reserved for shooting footage that might need to be slowed down later in post-production by leveraging these higher frame rates. So if you were to import 60 frames per second footage into a 24 frames per second editing timeline, that 60 frames per second clip is going to have a lot more frames than are necessary, and you're able to stretch out that clip and slow it down to meet that 24 frames per second timeline, and you're going to get slow motion footage when you do this. So that's a basic overview of how frame rates work. You're going to use 24 or 30 frames per second for regular videos, and then those higher frame rates for slow motion shooting. So next comes video resolution, and this refers to the number of pixels contained within each frame of video. So usually you'll see a measurement for the width and the height of the video frame in pixels, like 1920 pixels wide by 1080 pixels tall, and this would be a 1080p video frame known as Full HD. And then a 4K video frame would be 3840 by 2160, known as Ultra HD. And 4K and 1080p resolution are the two most common resolutions that you'll be working with for video. When you're creating YouTube videos or professional client work or even short films, 4K is usually the better option because you're going to get 4 times the amount of pixels to work with, which typically means the sharper and better your image is going to look. 1080p is going to work well for social media platforms like Instagram and Facebook, and it'll even look pretty solid on YouTube as well. Now, before the next topic, if you do have your own YouTube channel, click the link down in the description below to join our next YouTube Jumpstart Challenge. It's a 3-day event where you're able to work with other creators and people from our team, and our CEO, Sean Cannell, will be teaching you lessons about how to grow on YouTube, how to start making money on YouTube as well. There's so much incredible information, and this is a completely free event. You can click the link down below in the description to sign up, and we'll see you at our Jumpstart. Now, our next setting is shutter speed, and shutter speed refers to the length of time that your camera's sensor is exposed to light while shooting. So the slower your shutter speed is, the more light your sensor will let in, and the more motion blur you'll have as well. On the reverse, the faster your shutter speed is, the less light is going to be hitting your sensor, and then the less motion blur you'll have as well. Now, the standard rule of thumb for shooting video is that you always want your shutter speed to be double whatever your frame rate is that you're shooting. So if you're shooting at 24 frames per second, double that would be 1/48th of a second shutter speed, or as close as you can get, which would be like 1/50th of a second for a lot of cameras. Same goes for shooting in 60 frames per second. You would double that to 1/120 or 1/125 if that's what your camera can shoot at. Now, the reason this is important is because it creates the correct amount of motion blur for your video footage. Video is supposed to have a little bit of natural motion blur in it, so when you crank the shutter speed too high, it begins to look pretty choppy. So here's a little example. When I increase my shutter speed on this clip that was shot at 24 frames per second to 1/500th of a second shutter speed, this footage looks super weird. There's almost no motion blur anymore, and it looks very strange. But the same also goes for when I lower the shutter speed too slow. I'll drop it down to like 1/15th of a second, and this is way too slow, and now there's too much motion blur. Sometimes it's okay to play around with these a little bit to get some different creative looks, but for the most part, your shutter speed is always going to be double whatever your frame rate is. Now, since we have to shoot at a specific shutter speed for video, sometimes that image might look a little bit too bright, and we can use what's called a neutral density filter, or ND filter for short, which screws onto the front of your camera lens and is a filter that cuts out light from hitting your camera sensor. So think of this as sort of like sunglasses for your camera, which helps you shoot at these lower shutter speeds that are necessary for capturing the right motion blur. So if you're trying to dial in the right settings, but your footage still looks too bright, you're probably going to need an ND filter. The good news is actually these are pretty affordable. You just need to choose the right size for whatever lens you have. And we'll link a couple options down in the description below. Our next setting is aperture, and aperture controls how much light enters your camera through the lens, and it's measured in what's called f-stops, like f1.8 or f16, and you'll see these f-stop values on your lens a lot of the times. A lower f-stop value like f1.8 creates a really wide open aperture value, letting in lots of light, and it's going to give you a really nice blurry background and a good depth of field for beautiful looking shots. And this is great for isolating a subject from the background. Now, a higher f-stop number like f16 actually creates a really small aperture opening of your lens. So it lets in less light, but it then keeps more of your scene in focus. And this can be helpful on bright sunny days. If you don't want to crank your shutter speed, you can increase your f-stop number to reduce the amount of light hitting your sensor, or is even helpful in different video shots when you want more of your scene in focus. So that's how aperture works. And next would be ISO. And ISO is what increases your camera's sensitivity to light, which then makes your image appear brighter. So a lower ISO value like 100 means that your camera is going to be less sensitive to light, but also this means your image is going to look a lot cleaner and crispier. As you increase your ISO value, your sensor is actually going to become more sensitive to light, so your image is going to appear a lot brighter, but you're also going to be introducing digital noise into your image, and your image may appear kind of grainy if your camera doesn't have great ISO performance. So for the most part with ISO, you just want to keep it as low as you can while still obviously maintaining correct exposure. So shoot to keep your ISO between maybe 100 and 800 ISO, and if it's still too dark, I'd probably consider adding more lights into your scene to get that correct exposure. Now the last main setting is white balance, and setting your white balance ensures that the colors in your video look correct by adjusting for the different lighting temperatures you might encounter. So the most common white balance settings you'll choose are 5600 Kelvin and 3200 Kelvin. And what you'll do is set your camera's white balance to 5600 Kelvin when you're shooting in daylight environments, or you're using cooler temperature lights, maybe in your studio space. Like I'm using a 5600 Kelvin daylight colored light right now to light myself, so I set my camera's white balance to 5600. Now, if you're working with warmer lights like tungsten bulbs or warm interior house lighting, you're going to want to set your white balance to 3200 Kelvin to compensate for that warmer color temperature. And sometimes you're going to encounter mixed lighting conditions where you have daylight coming in through a window and maybe you have house lighting that's warm. Sometimes you'll have to split the difference a little bit, and you could try something like 4200 Kelvin as a good middle ground for your color temperature, or you could always leave your camera in auto white balance as a last resort, but typically we do recommend setting a manual white balance. Now let's talk about lighting. Lighting is really important because it can help you achieve your optimal camera settings, especially allowing you to shoot at those lower ISO values, which just gives you a better looking image overall. And the most common technique for achieving really great lighting is what's called 3-point lighting, where you use 3 different lights to light your subject. So let's break this down really quickly. The first light that you'll use is called the key light, and this is the most important light that is going to be the main light source for your subject. You're going to want to place this light at about a 45 to 30 degree angle towards the side of your subject, which is just going to help add some nice depth and texture to your face. You don't want it to be too straight on because your lighting will look a little bit too flat. Now the second light here is called the fill light, and you're going to put this on the opposite side of your key light at a lower intensity as well. And this is going to help soften those shadows that are created by your key light a little bit. And what's cool is this can even be just like a window, like you could put a window to your fill side, or even if you're really on a budget, like a reflector or a foam board for like $1, you can go buy a white foam board from the Dollar Tree and then use that to bounce the light from your key light back onto your subject, and that then acts like a fill light. And then the final light in 3-point lighting is called the backlight, and this is going to be a light positioned behind your subject to help separate them from the background a little bit. So this is really important and just helps your subject pop a little bit more from the environment, especially if you're wearing like a dark shirt on a dark background. It can be really helpful to add a backlight to separate your subject and just add some more depth to your scene. That's a basic rundown of 3-point lighting and something I actually use every single day. I'll link a few lights down in the description below that will work great for a 3-point lighting system. Now, if you're ready to take your camera and start making your own YouTube videos and growing your YouTube channel, you've got to join our Jumpstart happening in just a couple weeks. So click the link down below to join our YouTube Jumpstart Challenge, and we'll see you in the next video.